just announced the death of His Holiness Pope John Paul II. His health had deteriorated rapidly over the past 24 hours, and he died in his private apartment just about an hour ago. In St. Peter's Square below, a crowd of many thousands had maintained a vigil, praying for the Pope in his final hours. In Britain, indeed across the globe, Catholics have prayed for the man whose papacy became the third longest in history. Good evening from Rome and from the Vatican. A short time ago, officials announced the death of Pope John Paul II. The great bell of St. Peter's signals the news to the world. Pope was 84, and his papal reign was the third longest in history. The Pope's condition had worsened considerably in the past 24 hours, with severe heart and kidney problems allied to the effects of Parkinson's disease. In this special program from Rome, we'll be reporting on the life and achievements of Karol Wojtyła, the first non-Italian pope for almost 500 years. His unyielding style of leadership gave security and comfort to many people, but it also proved controversial. First tonight, I'm joined by our correspondent, Jeremy Bowen, who's been monitoring events. Jeremy, tell us how this announcement was made.
Well, Hugh, the announcement came in an email circulated by the Pope's spokesman to Vatican correspondents. It said that the Pope died at 21:37, 37 minutes past 9 local time. We're an hour ahead of London, in his private apartments. That was more or less it. At around 10 o'clock local, an announcement came over to the many thousands of people in St. Peter's Square, came over a loudspeaker. It said the Pope was dead. There was the immediate response, and this is the Italian way of death, their response to death. There was clapping, there was applause. At funerals, Italians clap the coffin. Then after that, there was silence. There were prayers. At the moment, we can hear perhaps, and perhaps people at home also can hear, the prayers rising up from St. Peter's. They're leading prayers there now. As soon as the announcement came, though, some people started to leave, especially people with children. I've been down there, so a lot of upset in the crowd, a lot of people crying.
During the day, we've had conflicting signals, haven't we, from the Vatican? We've had talk of a high fever, and yet the Pope responding to those around his bedside. And I think it's fair to say, Jeremy, that by this evening, we weren't expecting further news, were we?
Well, no, I think the thing about the situation, the way this has been, is that it's been a little bit unpredictable. We didn't really know. If you think back to last couple of Thursday, it was unexpected that the Pope suddenly declined. He had this urinary infection, and thereafter his decline was pretty quick, though we had heard this evening already that his heart was proving very resilient.
What's now happened, the passing of the Pope, inevitably will lead people to assess his papacy. Nearly 27 years, it's a remarkable fact, it's the third longest in history. In these initial moments after the death, Jeremy, what do you think will be the notable things attributed to John Paul II?
John Paul was one of the most notable figures in any walk of life of the entire 20th century. Think back to the way that he was when he started as Pope, 58 years old, strong and vigorous and very vocal man, a great communicator. Think of those huge masses that he led in Poland, especially his home country, in the late 70s and the early 80s, which helped pave the way for the growth of solidarity. What happens now in the Pope's apartments is that, first, of course, they'll deal with his body, and then they'll remove his personal effects. They'll seal the apartments. They'll break, with witnesses, an official called the Camerlengo will break his papal ring, a gold ring of St. Peter, and also the papal seal. This is because in years gone by there was a risk of impersonations. A whole process now unfolds, which of course has been there for centuries.
Jeremy, stay with us. We'll talk to you again later on. Thank you very much. Well, as Jeremy was saying, the pontificate of John Paul II has lasted almost 27 years, a remarkable fact, the third longest in history. And it followed, of course, one of the briefest, that of John Paul I, who served barely a month in the early autumn of 1978. This Pope has been an immense figure on the world stage. His experiences as a priest in Nazi-occupied Poland and later in communist Poland defined his outlook and his values. Nicholas Witchell looks back at the life and times of Karol Wojtyła, the Polish priest who became Pope John Paul II.
Habemus Papam.
October 1978. From a balcony at the Vatican, a new name was thrust onto the world stage. Karol Józef Wojtyła from Poland, the first non-Italian pope for 400 years, and at 58, the youngest for a century. His choice was a break with the past, but in this charismatic but uncompromising cardinal from Krakow, the Catholic Church had elected a pope who was prepared to travel the world and preach the toughest of messages. His mission was clear-cut, to reverse years of liberal drift. So Pope John Paul II said a decisive no to contraception, abortion, divorce, homosexuality, and married and female priests. But alongside that was a passionate yes to human rights and justice for the poor.
The poor people and poor nations will judge those people who take these goods away from them, amassing to themselves the imperialistic monopoly of economic and